Alright, here goes again. When a Chinaman travels, he carries no arms. One account has him telling Ron, "Do you think I am a Chinaman?" Looking Glass also stresses that his people had no quarrel with Montanans and hoped to pass through without conflict. "Let us by," he told Ron, "past your stockade and through the Bitterroot Valley, and no one need be bothered." The key uncertainty is what Ron's ultimate response was. He wrote of his official report that he had insisted on full surrender while also stalling in the hope that reinforcements were close by. After pressing his point, he said he returned to his log blockade, expecting the Nez Perces to attack in full force. There he did indeed find movement. The volunteers were leaving. Once they heard of the Nez Perce promise to do no harm, Ron reported they saw no reason to rile them. Quote, "Things seemed to get quiet," unquote, a participant remembered, and then continues to say, "And then we discovered that our citizen contingent was getting much smaller all the time. At some point, probably on July 26, Governor Potts had appeared, although his role in negotiations, if any, is unclear. Now he left too." Some Nez Perces would agree that Ron made a rigid demand. They responded with distrust, worrying again about being hanged. One account has the young warriors, red moccasin tops, and Rainbow calling for a fight to the end. These accounts, like Ron, sound like a standoff. Yet Joseph wrote later that when Ron told him that they could not get past the soldiers and citizens, they answered that they would, peaceably or not, and that we then made a treaty with these soldiers. We agreed not to molest anyone, and they agreed that we might pass through the Bitterroot country in peace. Howard also claimed that the Nez Perces had negotiated their way past Ron. Whether Ron would have fought turned out to be moot. On July 28th, the band started down the canyon and then turned north on an alternate path unknown to Ron, behind a crest that shielded them from any hostile fire. A few men stayed behind, perched in some rocks, and fired occasional warning shots at a steep angle to keep Ron in place. A few miles down the canyon, the bands emerged into the Bitterroot Valley and made camp several miles to the south. Ron withdrew to Missoula to wait for help. Some Montana editors ridiculed Ron and his command as imbeciles and cowards and, quote, useless as boys with pop guns. Their log emplacement became an artifactual jibe dubbed Fort Fizzle. It is hard to imagine. What is?
The chocolate.
Oh, I know, it is good. Have you tried that Ritter chocolate? It's like German.
Have you? Oh, yes, I have. I love Toblerone. That's my favorite.
Oh, yeah. So good.
I love dark chocolate.
Oh, okay. My sister loves that.
Oh, I could do half of me for a few minutes.
Their long emplacement became an artifactual jibe dubbed Fort Fizzle. It is hard to imagine, however, what else Ron could have done. By the time the Nez Perces made their move, this force had shrunk to a number that would surely have been overrun, or at best blown by in a confrontation. He could only have angered the warriors, not stopped them, which in turn would only have endangered white Montanans, not protected them. In fact, once past the barrier, the Nez Perces could not have behaved more peacefully. They joked with a few volunteers who followed them, and on July 31st, the day after Howard started over the trail, some of them came into the town of Stevensville looking for supplies, especially flour. Store owners Henry Buck and his brother found that the Indians had plenty of gold coin and promised to pay for everything, although the Bucks had little flour, and the party proceeded to a nearby mill to buy some. The next day, a much larger group came to town, the finest-looking tribe of Indians I have ever seen. The next day, a much larger group came to town, the, quote, finest-looking tribe of Indians I have ever seen, but counted 115 warriors. The only hint of trouble was when a few younger men bought whiskey and turned rowdy. Older leaders quickly controlled them. The townspeople, too, were reasonably cordial. Many among the pursuing troops were in a rage when told of these exchanges. "These are the hardy frontiersmen the Eastern papers talk about," Mason wrote to his wife. "It is for such cattle that we risk our lives." The press railed at the avaricious wretches and claimed, apparently without foundation, that they had trailed the bands with wagons of goods in pursuit of more profits. Townspeople, however, were only selling what probably would have been taken away anyway, perhaps violently. Some of them knew the Nez Perces, who came often to hunt and visit in the area, and considered them friends. During the next few days, as Howard's command labored toward the Lolo summit, the bands moved up the Bitterroot Valley at a leisurely pace, bothering no one and apparently buying more supplies from white residents. They added slightly to their numbers. A few weeks earlier, a small band of a dozen or so had returned from a hunt on the plains and were on their way over the Lolo Trail when they heard of the troubles in Idaho. To avoid the fighting, they turned back to Montana, and now they joined the procession up the valley. One of them, a mixed blood named Lean Elk, had arrived limping from an accidental leg wound, and jittery whites had reportedly accused him of being a war refugee. Excuse me. Lean Elk, sorry about all the towels in there. Are you taking a shower? Lean Elk would turn out to be an important addition. Called Poker Joe by whites, he knew the mountains between them and the buffalo country in exquisite detail. He soon emerged as a natural leader. The events between the time the Nez Perces left home to when they were easing up the Bitterroot Valley toward buffalo country have more import than just the fiasco at Fort Fizzle. They hold hints about a puzzle with revealing answers. The puzzle is what the Nez Perces were thinking when they decided to leave Idaho. The answers say something about their thinking generally, and that of the other Western Indians, and about how that thinking was now calamitously out of sync with a transformed America. Back home, the Nez Perces had taken 12.5 civilian lives and had inflicted humiliating defeats on the army, while killing nearly 60 officers and men. Now they apparently reasoned that simply by crossing the Bitterroots from Idaho to Montana they would be in the clear, and then by taking one step farther into buffalo country they would find safe refuge among their friends the Crows. They did apparently consider heading north directly for Canada, a place they called King George's Land, or in reference to Queen Victoria, the old woman's country. Nice. But the main drift of their discussions was about the choice they saw as simple: stay in Idaho to fight, or cross the mountains to get away from fighting. The reasoning seems breathtakingly naive. It makes sense only when one tries to reimagine their perspective. Like most Indians, the Nez Perces lived in a small radius world. They knew whites had come from far away, and they knew of Washington, but was Washington a man who so had asked a house? They knew that the settlers who had come through and into their country were connected to others to the east, and they knew that whites close by and far distant had power, economic and spiritual. What they seemed not to grasp was how that power, even then, was of a concentrated scope far beyond anything they had ever known. And why would they have known? At the time of the war, no leader among the resistors had ever been back east, or for that matter to any sizable center such as Portland. None had ever dealt with anyone who had invoked anything but the most ephemeral authority, some reference to some president and Congress and a constitution. No white leader had ever come up with more than 100 troops to make that authority real.